We're covering the political, diplomatic, and humanitarian parts of this important story, this crisis. And we start with New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who back in 2013 on the committee voted in favor of the U.S. taking military action in Syria. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Do you think some of your colleagues who didn't vote with you back in 2013 have regret tonight?
Well, the committee, as when I was chairman, passed at the request of President Obama an authorization for the use of military force for the purposes of ending the chemical weapon usage that Assad was using at the time. And he went to the G20 summit in Russia and told Putin, I have an authorization, and if you don't get Assad to give up the chemical weapons, I'm going to look forward to using it. And that ultimately turned what we thought were all the chemical weapons over to a UN entity. The reality is that, you know, we also at that time gave President Obama certain authorities to help moderate, vetted Syrian rebels fight their own cause so that American troops didn't have to be there. And unfortunately, that didn't go the way we would have liked to have seen. There wasn't a robust engagement in that regard. So the chemical weapons were largely turned over to a UN entity. Now we see a resurgence of them. That has a real consequence. And Russia, who was a party at the time, it's just amazing to me that in the president's condemnation today, which I'm glad to say at least he condemns the attacks, but he has not one word about Russia's complicity in this process.
All right. President said today he crossed a lot of lines for me, meaning him, and he was talking about the little babies, of course, and so many innocent civilians killed in this. What is that line? I know that President Obama had that famous red line remark that everyone keeps raising, but what is that cross line? And so what does that mean? What would you advise him to do or not to do?
Well, I don't know for the president what he means by crossed a lot of lines for him and what he intends to do. It seems to me that when you can talk about crossing a line, but you don't even mention Russia as a party that is empowering Assad and giving him, for example, air support. I think that the attacks that took place ultimately took place by dropping from aircraft. That's the Russians and their engagement with the Iranians that are through Hezbollah that are both propping up Assad. So it seems to me that you have to challenge the Russian and the Iranians to say you just can't continue to prop up Assad without a consequence. You have to make it very clear if you're going to engage anyone, it should be moderate, vetted Syrian rebels to let them fight in their own country so you can change the dynamics. Right now, between Russia and Iran's engagement, the pendulum has swung back to Assad, and you know, he believes that he can sustain and survive this fight. That dynamic needs to change, and the dynamic that needs to change is that Russia and Iran think they can continue to have this proxy war engaged in Syria without any consequence.
All right, this discussion began primarily back in 2012 about chemical weapons. And of course, now in the last 36 hours, everyone's talking about it. But there have been reports between 2012 and now that there's been other use of chemical weapons against civilians in their area. I don't know if it's confirmed or not, but suddenly now, you know, the world is, you know, understandably and rightfully horrified about what we're seeing. But have we not monitored this since 2013? Have there been other instances of chemical weapons used against the civilians there?
There have been other forms of the chemical weapons as we understood under the listing by the UN of what is a chemical weapon was supposedly largely turned over and destroyed. But now other elements of what would be we would consider a chemical weapon is being used by the Assad regime with Russia. And so at different moments in time, that has been a question of fixing blame and responsibility has been a challenge. But the rebels don't have aircraft. They cannot drop this type of bomb on civilian populations. So it's pretty clear who is responsible.
So what's your explanation of the fact that the president blames Assad, Syria, rightfully? He blames President Obama, and I think, you know, unfairly, and he doesn't mention Russia. So what's your conclusion from that?
Well, my conclusion is that he is not committed to actually ending the horrific set of humanitarian catastrophes and or enforcing a red line if you're not willing to take on Russia. And this administration hasn't been willing to take on Russia in any iteration whatsoever, whether it's the cyber attack on our elections, whether it's what's happened in the Baltics, whether it's the annexation of Crimea. But above all, this is the moment. This is the moment in which I believe that the president must act resolutely against Russia because they are empowering Assad. Otherwise, Assad would be gone.
All right, one quick question. Military action or not?
Well, I don't think that at this moment you have that capability. I don't think you can enter into Syria and put American boots on the ground and be successful. What you can be doing is really engaging robustly in helping moderate vetted Syrian rebels fight for themselves, change the dynamic on the ground, and then lead to a political solution. But there's going to be no political solution for so long as Russia and Iran think they can get away with what they're doing without consequence, and Assad believes he can survive it. Then the equation doesn't ever lend itself to a political solution.
Senator, thank you, sir.
Thank you.